Hey there, Kyle Orser with Speed Mechanics. Welcome to another edition of Mind Dump Monday. I know this is Tuesday, but we had some technical difficulties with the cameras, so thanks for tuning in today on Tuesday. I wanted to talk a little bit about maximal aerobic speed versus tempo running and how that relates to the speed reserve and your overall speeds that you're hitting. I had the opportunity to chat with an old friend of mine, Jimmy Roney, so shout out to him, who's doing some great work in Ultimate right now around the province and in the city. And so we were discussing the idea of the speed reserve, and I broke that down a little bit more in depth around training and training speeds. And so I wanted to touch on that today, as it's an important component to the speed reserve. So we'll look at the far side of the board here. For those of you that don't know, maximal aerobic speed, that's your MAS, is how fast you're running in an aerobic state. So if you want to put that into playing context, it's basically the top speed that you could run around for say a half an hour without getting tired. You could do that at a pretty good clip. So on average would be 5 meters per second. People are going to be above that and people are going to be below that depending on your sport, your position, your age, and your skill level. So I've just arbitrarily picked, and I've actually taken this directly from James Smith's applied sprint training seen here. This is a fantastic resource, so if you get a second and you want to learn more about sprinting and how to apply it, this is a great resource. So James lays this out very easy for you to very easily see. So when we look at MAS, this would be calculated based off of your beep test score, your yo-yo score, 30-15 score. These are all just general aerobic tests that you might do in a team setting to determine, well, coaches usually use it for tracking purposes, but you can actually find out your maximal aerobic speed and then program off of that. So commonly you'll see coaches use about 130%. So this is 125 to 130%, 130 to 135, and 135 to 140%. Coaches are generally programming, if they're going to use this, they're going to program somewhere in there, and they're going to generally do about 15 seconds on, 15 seconds off, or they'll modify your on period or your off period, and then you'll do 1, 2, 3 sets of that. Depending on what they're trying to elicit. The tempo running is something that I use in training. It's not something that I created. This is something stolen from the track and field world. Charlie Francis was a big proponent for it. Keir, the at rugby strength coach, is a huge proponent for it. Derek Hansen. There's a lot of guys in the speed community that are huge proponents for tempo running versus MAS, and I'll explain why. So when we look at your top speed of, say, an athlete hits 10.5 meters per second over that distance, then we would program your training, your intervals, or your conditioning work based off of that, rather than an MAS score. So an MAS score is pretty low, and if we look at that sort of 130, 140% range, you're training at about 6.5 meters per second to 7 meters per second if your MAS is 5 meters per second. Say they've got a top speed of 10.5 meters per second. Generally, a tempo run is going to be somewhere between 65 to 75% of your top speed. So if we're looking at 65%, that's 6.66 meters per second, up to 75%, which is 7.1 meters per second. So the top end is going to be 7.1 versus 7.0 meters per second. Now, anyone that's ever done an MAS interval. These intervals are brutal. 15 seconds on, 15 seconds off with either active or passive recovery, depending on, again, what the coach is prescribing, is very tough. You go anaerobic very quickly. The lactate is burning in your legs. Your lungs are on fire. You generally want to keel over and not do much more than that. For those of my athletes that have ever done tempo runs, or anyone else who's ever done a tempo run, you know that generally the first interval and the last interval are about the same difficulty. They don't get harder during. They're fast. They're at a fast clip. They're faster than an MAS, but it's a recovery session. You're getting aerobic work done. You're improving your work capacity at that 75% or less. You're working in an aerobic state. So even though it's hard work, it's not easy work, but you're moving at a fast pace. You're learning to be relaxed and fluid, so you're not expending extra energy at these higher speeds, but you're able to recover from them as well, which is extremely important. So if I'm jogging around the field trying to be in position, I'm jockeying the ball, I'm playing off the ball in soccer, for example, but I'm trying to be in position or just kind of keep up, check, then I can do this at a faster clip, be aerobic, be relaxed, and ready. I'm conserving energy and ready to make a fast break. So this makes a lot more sense. You can build up the volume, and depending on your sport and your position and your age and your training age, then there's different volumes that you would want to have one, 2 or 3 sessions in a week. It's a season dependent. All right, so if we look here at this chart, again, this is borrowed from James Smith's Applied Sprint Training. It's an excellent resource. If you look here at the velocity at 30 meters per second, we look here at 11.11, that would be Usain Bolt's 30 meter velocity. And then working down from that, we've got 10.5, 10, 9.5, 9, 8.5, and 8 meters per second. Across the top, we've got 95%, 90, 85, 80, 75, 70, and 65% of the speed. So if we look at most sports, the top speeds that are hit in game are about 6 to 8 meters per second. So if we look in this blue area here, that's the top end and the low end being there. These are all the speeds that are between 6 to 8 meters per second. So you can see if I can only sprint at a top speed of 8 meters per second, well, that's the max. Then I'm going to be redlining a lot. But if I boost up to 10 meters per second, well, now I've got more choices, and I don't hit this 8 meters per second until I'm running at 80%. Well, if this is 80% for me, that means that my tempo runs at 75% aren't that much more. So this is a little bit harder than my tempo runs. I know that if I have to hit those sorts of speeds, I can do that all day. This is going to be, yeah, there'll be some taxing moments, but 80% is a lot easier to recover from than if that's 100% of my max. So the point of this is looking at, we want to raise our ceiling up higher. We want to, if our athletes are at 8 meters per second, we want to try to boost that by doing sprint training. We need to do speed training. We need to incorporate that into our training plan, and we need to do it appropriately. The other thing is the tempo runs. We can practice running at a good clip, nice and relaxed. This is going to transfer to our sprint training because we get to practice it. Sprinting is a skill, so we need to practice it, but we need to practice it at some slower speeds. Now 75% is actually still a pretty good speed to train at, but it's not going to affect our ceiling, but it will allow us good practice, quality practice, at a fast enough speed that we can recover, but we can start to ingrain better sprinting mechanics and better habits for our running that are going to transfer then to in-game. Now we practice these in ideal qualities so that when we go to game sort of speeds, we're better prepared. You won't run like a track and field sprinter in game, of course, but we practice in good conditions so that when we go to less optimal conditions, we're better prepared. So from here, the next step would be incorporating sprint training into your training plans. That's a whole other topic to go on, but this is just to show the importance that we need to boost our athletes' ceilings as much as possible to allow them the ability to recover better in game. They can have more, they'll have the opportunity to recover from high intensity efforts, attacks, so that by the end of the game, they have more in the tank to make those final attacks, to push for goals or to push the other team away from your net. You know, they'll be able to attack because that other team's coming for you. If you're ahead or if you're down, you've got extra gas in the tank to attack all the way to the end. If you have any questions or you've got comments on this or you want to know more about something that I talked about here, please post in the comments below or shoot me a message at info@speedmechanics.ca. I'd love to hear your thoughts and questions, and we can get to them in another video. Otherwise, check us out on Instagram and Facebook at SPD Mechanics. Until next time, thanks.